Hi guys, Forgotten Wolf here, and this is the finale to my Winds of Winter's predictions, as I'm going to be predicting Sansa Stark and going over my prediction for the epilogue of Winds of Winter in this video. Before we begin, thank you so much for supporting me on this journey and giving all your feedback to my chapter predictions, and with that out of the way, let's begin. Sansa Stark, of course, is still going by the name Elaine Stone, and she is still in the Vale. And Elaine Stone is Littlefinger's alleged bastard daughter in the Vale, although in reality it's Sansa Stark. But for simplicity's sake, I'm going to be referring to the Elaine chapters as Sansa chapters. So in Sansa slash Elaine 1, we already know what's going to be happening, as it's a confirmed sample chapter that George R. R. Martin has released. In this chapter, Sansa basically reunites with Harry the Heir, and she watches as a bunch of lords and ladies arrive for the tourney of the Winged Knights. Not much to say here besides that, given the fact that nothing important that's new is mentioned, it's likely one of the very first chapters in the Winds of Winter. In Sansa slash Elaine 2, the tourney officially begins, and while not confirmed, we have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen in this chapter, being Harry the Heir's death. In the tourney, Harry the Heir dies after losing a tilt, and his horse collapses on him, crushing him to death. And Harry dies, and Sansa is horrified and looks over at Littlefinger, who's even more angry. Harry the Heir needs to die, as Littlefinger is going to kill Robin Arryn if Harry doesn't die, and I highly doubt that George will strip one of the major houses of Westeros of their castles, but when Song of Ice and Fire is over. There's probably other evidence in there, but I can't really think of any off the top of my head right here. And yeah, and I'll just move quickly on to Sansa slash Elaine 3. Well, this will be the one of two chapters that'll be a turning point in Sansa's story, and the end of her second act, and the beginning of her third and final act in the books. This takes place after the Battle of the Kingswood, which I will quickly recap here, as Jon Connington and Mace Tyrell meet in the Kingswood, but this isn't a battle, as Mace Tyrell learns that Tommen is dead by this point. With that, the Tyrells don't need to support the Lannisters anymore, which is something that they have been regretting for a while. While Jon Connington convinces the Tyrells to join Aegon and yeah, they are marching on King's Landing. Littlefinger opens the chapter by recapping this to Sansa and telling her that the Lannisters are screwed, and the Lannisters will shortly be off the board as a credible player, as Tywin, Joffrey, Tommen, Marcel, and probably Cersei will be dead, with the only other two Lannister brothers, Jaime, being missing, and Tyrion fighting a battle in Meereen. Littlefinger and Sansa also talk about Harry the Heir's death, which Littlefinger doesn't blame Sansa at all, and Littlefinger says that they still have Robin Arryn, who loves Littlefinger and looks at him as kind of an uncle. Littlefinger also tells Sansa of her husband Tyrion, as Tyrion might die in the Battle of Fire, and with the Lannisters' destructions, she can hopefully go back to being Sansa Stark again, and they can win the support of the Vale Lords in a different way, and it's just the Boltons they have to worry about as real enemies to Sansa. As a side note, this will be the very first chapter after the Battle of the Kingswood, which is an off chapter event. We don't see this happen in live time, so this will be essentially how we learn of the Battle of the Kingswood. Before getting into the next chapter, I should mention there's a time gap between chapters, and during this time, King's Landing has fallen to Aegon, and Winterfell has been taken by Stannis Baratheon, with Rickon Stark being the new Lord of Winterfell. And now, getting on to Sansa slash Elaine 4. Sansa Stark is summoned by Littlefinger after she talks with Robin Arryn, and Robin Arryn remarks the hopes that he can live longer with Harry's death, and Robin Arryn also remarks that he's getting healthier. Sansa once again talks to Littlefinger. I know this might seem a bit repetitive but I should mention this is a really important chapter. This is the beginning of her third act, as Littlefinger tells Sansa that Stannis has taken Winterfell, and now Rickon Stark has risen to be the new Lord of Winterfell. And Sansa is shocked yet excited, as she thought Rickon was dead, and she wonders if Bran is alive as well. Littlefinger tells her that they are leaving for Winterfell to return Sansa home to her family. Unbeknownst to Sansa, Littlefinger intends to claim the regency for Lord Rickon Stark, who is only 8 years old at the time. Remember, each book isn't a year, unlike the show. There's a bit of time gap between the next few chapters. However, at the end of the chapter, Sansa thinks to herself, Elaine Stone had her fun, but she is gone now, and Sansa Stark can finally be her true self again. Those are my exact words for how that chapter's going to go. And whenever I'm talking about a Sansa chapter, I'm going to be referring them as Sansa chapters, no longer Sansa / Elaine, since Elaine Stone is gone. In Sansa 5, before I get into the chapter, I should mention that I don't want to say off screen, but I'm going to say that off screen, Littlefinger called the banners and of the Vale, and they ride north. And so getting into Sansa 5, this is, if you remember, one of the 2 Sansa chapters that I predicted all the way back in part 1 of the series. So it's nice that it's come full circle around over a year ago when I made the Starks and the Winds of Winter. And in Sansa 5, I've changed my mind on what this will be slightly. Of course, I mentioned at the time that Davos will allow Sansa and Littlefinger in as a kind of betrothal, but I've changed that. That makes no sense in hindsight, as Sansa and Littlefinger go to the north and they arrive at Winterfell. Littlefinger vows to have the Knights of the Vale to defend the Starks as he's declared loyalty to House Stark, and then tells Davos that he has Sansa Stark in his possession to prove his loyalty. Sansa Stark shouts to the guards there, officially revealing her identity as Sansa Stark, and tells Davos and the Winterfell guards how Littlefinger saved her from King's Landing and protected her from the Lannisters and all those who wanted to hand her over to Cersei. Sansa is let back into Winterfell, where she feels happy to be home. She is finally home after all this time. Later in the chapter, Sansa sneaks into Rickon's chambers where the 2 reunite, and Rickon cries tears of joy and won't stop hugging her, and Sansa's become like a mother to Rickon that he hasn't had in a while, as Rickon is too young to understand, as he was already extremely upset over all his family going missing, and naturally he's going to become, like, I don't want to say a sad boy, but kind of depressed in a way, and needs a motherly figure, which Sansa can be to Rickon as like how she was to Robin Arryn, if you remember from previous books. Before I go on to the final chapter of Winds of Winter, I will go over 2 more chapters that are important to Sansa. The first chapter is Arya 7, where Arya returns to Winterfell and reunites with Sansa. I'm predicting that it'll be very similar to their reunion from Season 7. It's just from Arya's perspective, as they're both looking over a Ned statue in the crypts. However, his bones haven't been returned at this time, and Arya and Sansa find there's a newfound understanding and bond between the 2 of them, and they remark what their father told them, that in winter they have to look out for one another and their sisters. And I'll go over to the other chapter really quick, which Sansa has a major character in, being Bran 5, where Bran returns to Winterfell, and reunites with Sansa, Arya, and Rickon. I should mention this, as I didn't cover this in part 1. Bran doesn't show no emotion like in the show. I feel like that's kind of bullshit. So instead, Bran is a bit overjoyed and showing more emotion than he has since book 2, really, as he's excited to see Rickon again and his family, but mostly Rickon. How later in the chapter, Bran and Sansa talk, where she tries to get Bran to claim Winterfell as he can assume his rightful position as the Lord of Winterfell. However, Bran rejects it, saying that he doesn't want Winterfell and can't be the Lord of Winterfell, as he's the 3-eyed raven. Much to Sansa's shock, you can assume he tells Sansa, Arya, and Rickon what he is later. He's the 3-eyed raven now. But Sansa's naturally shocked, and as Bran's giving up Winterfell. And the final chapter of Sansa's is the one that I covered back in part 1 of these predictions, being Sansa 6. In this chapter, the Stark children put Ned Stark's bones to rest in the crypts, as Robb's bones still haven't been found at this point. Hint, hint for A Dream of Spring. So then meets Jon, where Jon and Sansa have a conflict over who should be the Lord Regent for Rickon, since he is only 8 at the time. And it's Jon and Sansa's first real conversation in the books, as they didn't talk in book one, and their reunion will be very cold. And Jon shows a bit of that Targaryen fire in them, but at the at the end, they kind of have like an understanding and forgive each other, like how they did in season 6, episode 10, if you remember. And now I should mention the final chapter of Winds of Winter is Jon 5, where Sansa doesn't play a major role, but I need to include it here as she is present in this chapter. With all the Starks back in Winterfell, a council has been declared as all the major northern lords are there and all the Stark children to decide the Stark succession crisis, as you have arguments for Jon, Sansa, Bran, Rickon, everyone except Arya, really. With all the Starks back in Winterfell, I already ran over that, sorry. It starts with Bran and Arya saying they have no interest in the role of Winterfell, despite Bran being offered Winterfell by Sansa earlier and some of the northern lords now. Jon then instructs Howland Reed to hand him Robb's will, where to the whole north, Jon reads the will of King Robb Stark, making Jon a Stark and legally king in the north. And the book ends with everyone shouting, "The king in the north! The king in the north!" And Jon Snow becomes the king in the north. Finally, time for the epilogue, where we find out the fate of Benjen Stark, as I don't think he's dead, or at least yet. Now, I have zero idea why Benjen went missing, so my point more so is going to be what happens to Benjen Stark ultimately at the end of A Song of Ice and Fire. And Benjen, I'm guessing that he got taken by the Walkers or escaped, or I have really zero idea. It's hard to say. We've heard zero hints of what happened to Benjen, but anyway, Benjen is traveling on his horse where he stumbles into the White Walkers, and Benjen is captured by the Whites and dragged towards the Night King, and then Benjen Stark is killed. Remember, the Night King hasn't been officially confirmed as a character yet, so but I find it impossible that he isn't a character, and it sets dread, as now we know who leads the White Walkers into a dream of spring. Now, this could be the wall tumbling down, but I think that's not likely, as there's still a few things that need to happen before that, and I think it's best saved for like a prologue to A Dream of Spring. And with that epilogue and Sansa chapters predictions, that ends my Winds of Winter predictions. Before I mentioned, I didn't cover Sam Tarly. I do think he's going to be a character that gets POV chapters, but he was the one character I could not figure out what's going to happen. The one thing I do have is that Rhaegar, Lyanna, Sam discovers married, and that's all I had for Sam. But thank you guys so much for joining me on this series. These videos have exploded my channel in popularity, so it's sad to see the Winds of Winter predictions come to an end, as I have enjoyed them. However, I'll be taking a short break before predicting A Dream of Spring, as I will be getting onto that. I do want to finish that, and A Dream of Spring predictions will start in the summer, but yeah, the end of the Game of Thrones books will be predicted. But first, what if Game of Thrones went to 10 seasons, part 3 and 4? Part 3, May 2026. But until then, bye!